Well, despite fierce criticism, the British Parliament has passed a law that is intended to deprive people who have entered the country irregularly of their right to asylum. And despite the heavy criticism, the British Parliament passed this law on Tuesday night that is intended to revoke the right to asylum for people who have entered the country in irregular ways. The law against illegal migration can thus come into force in July. And for example, it should make it possible to immediately arrest migrants who cross the English Channel to Great Britain in small boats. Last year alone, more than 45,000 people came to the UK this way, and in the future they are to be deported to their home countries or a third country without an opportunity to apply for asylum. Refugee Aid and the United Nations Human Rights Office warn of the far-reaching effects of tightening asylum law. The law violates Britain's obligations under international human rights and refugee law by preventing people from claiming protection for themselves, regardless of the specific circumstances. Even when deported to another country, there is no guarantee that the refugees will receive protection there. The UN is asking the UK government to reverse the law. And the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, said about this new legislation severely undermines the legal framework that has protected so many people and exposes refugees to grave risks in violation of international law. UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Türk stressed that Great Britain had long campaigned for compliance with international human rights and refugee law. He's now calling on the London government to renew this commitment to human rights by reversing this law. The rights of all migrants, refugees and asylum seekers must be respected, protected and fulfilled without discrimination. As of this week, who's seeking refuge in the UK without pre-authorization will no longer have the right to seek asylum in the country itself. And this excludes almost all of the people who cross the English Channel in the thousands every month in small boats from the traditional right of asylum on the island. This new illegal immigration law, which as I said came into effect on Tuesday, gives the government the power to refuse to accept asylum claims and instead detain those who have landed until they can be deported back to their homeland or elsewhere. In principle, no exceptions are made for children or victims of human trafficking. The Ministry of Interior, the Home Office, has been commissioned to ensure that unauthorized arrivals are removed as quickly as possible. The new law makes it impossible for the deportees to return to Great Britain at a later date. Church people, welfare organizations, and critics in all parties describe the entry into force of the new regulations as a black day. Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, the most senior minister in the Church of England, condemned the legislation as unacceptable. Lady Jenny Jones, a former leader of the Green Party, called the law disgraceful and shameful for our country. Welby, Jones and most of the other members of the House of Lords, Westminster's other chamber, had vehemently opposed the law in recent weeks and tried to revise it, with only modest success. In the end, the House of Commons, with its Tory majority, forced the House of Lords to give up its opposition. And finally, the House of Nobility must respect the will of the elected chamber and the British people, is what Conservative Lord Murray, as Secretary of State at the Home Office, said. Earlier, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Home Secretary Suella Braverman had made it clear that for them, the law against illegal immigration was indispensable, with all its consequences. Sunak's government expects the change in law to have a comprehensive deterrent effect. According to the British government, the migrants should be able to be sent to Rwanda, among other places, regardless of their origin. This project comes up against legal hurdles. An agreement already concluded with the East African country is on hold at the moment. The pact would see Britain hand over its responsibility for protecting asylum seekers to Rwanda in exchange for money. And now the highest court is to decide, the Supreme Court in London. The tightening of British asylum law has been planned for months. Among other things, the government wants to reduce the accommodation costs, which currently cost almost 7 million euros for hotel rooms every day, as there are not enough reception facilities. And fighting illegal migration is one of the main concerns for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The refugees who cross the English Channel to England in rubber boats are the main topic in election campaigns, especially for the right wing of the Tories. The government expects refugees and migrants to abandon plans to cross the Channel once they realize their presence in Britain will not be tolerated. Braverman has repeatedly stated that those concerns could stay over on the continent, where they are safe in countries like France. In order to increase the deterrent effect, illegal arrivals should no longer be accommodated in hotels or similar, but in this disused military barracks and even in floating apartment blocks on barges in southern English ports. Just as the new law came into force on Tuesday, the first large launch, the BB Stockholm, arrived in the port of Portland on the coast of the southwest English county of Devon, where it is now to be moored to transport the first refugees before the end of the month. Previously used for workers on the high seas with 250 small rooms for just as many employees, the barge is now ready for twice as many unwanted migrants. There are plans to rent more of those residential ships of this type. Of course, experts believe that accommodation on such barges is not even significantly cheaper than in hotel rooms. Quite apart from the questionable nature of this measure, any deportation would also be extremely expensive. After all, as many refugees are still landing in England this summer as in the summer of last year. On some days, more than 500. Of those who have arrived so far and are not covered by the new law, over 160,000 are still waiting for their asylum applications still to be processed. And the right to asylum can be restricted in certain situations only. The right to asylum is a fundamental right enshrined in various international agreements and national laws. It guarantees people fleeing persecution the right to seek protection in another country and to apply for asylum there. Although the right to asylum is protected in principle, there are indeed certain circumstances in which it can be restricted or suspended. And some of the possible reasons for restriction of the right to asylum can be, first of all, security concerns. If a person is considered a threat to the national security of the receiving country, their application for asylum may be rejected or restricted. And there is a third country regulation. Some countries have agreements or laws that state that asylum seekers must first seek protection in a third country before they can enter the country where they ultimately wish to seek asylum. But I hope you listen to the wording. And there's mass migration or state of emergencies. In exceptional situations, such as a massive number of asylum seekers or a humanitarian crisis, countries can temporarily limit or suspend their asylum regimes. However, compliance with international human rights standards remains of great importance to ensure that restrictions on the right to asylum are lawful but also proportionate and non-discriminatory. And none of these cases apply to this new law, especially since Britain never wants to let the refugees it wants to send to Rwanda back into the country. But even the third country part said they have to claim asylum there first before they enter Britain. And they don't want to allow that. So even if that would happen, that's one of the points. And we must not talk about a mass influx of refugees, because comparing to a lot of countries on the continent, the refugees coming over the English Channel is just a fracture of those that are entering countries like Germany. And so that doesn't count either. So this new law, breaks international law, period. And it is expensive. In an earlier video, I talked about the numbers that were published for the costs of the deportations. And they don't make it worth either. It is so expensive, and the accommodation on the barges, just as a deterrent, is expensive as well. So this is all just a big show for the next election campaign for extreme right-wingers. It doesn't even make sense cost-wise, trouble-wise with the rest of the international community, and so on. It is just a mere PR show for extreme right-wingers so that they vote Tory in the next general election. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.